very pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a great pleasure to come south, and I sat on the plane with someone who was the mayor of the Gore District Council for 12 years, so I had a running commentary on the history of every hill. I identified every river as we came past, and he showed me with great pride the sheep station that he has near Gore. So it was a lovely sort of way to sort of flee the North Island and to arrive in this nice place. And I thank you for that. I believe that you met someone called Cyril yesterday. And I'm a bit perturbed about that, because I heard someone say sotto voce as I walked out of morning tea, oh, there goes Cyril. And I think that's a cruel blow. But at least you haven't called me Stanley, who I believe was quite a gentleman. Or was he a genitalia man? I'm not sure. But I was really pretty perturbed, and I heard all those reports of wild presentations. Peter gave a little bit of background to himself. I don't need to because of the lovely introduction. Thanks for that. But I do want to mention kind of the process by which I arrived to the place where I am with this presentation. In 2007, I had for some years been really quite perturbed about a number of inequities in the system. I'd worked most of my life in the southern part of the Auckland city, and that meant that I was really pretty aware that there wasn't a fair deal going on in the education system. But I was worried about things like the monopoly that the school system had on free education. That's a funny thing to say in the South here, where you've been pretty pioneers, but by and large it seemed to me to be utterly wrong that someone could stay at school to the age of 19 and fail as much as they needed to for free. And it just seemed to me to be wrong that schools had a capture of all these young people, but with no obligation to see that they succeeded. And that was a deplorable situation, and if you work in the demographics that I work with, you'll know what the trends are, and you'll know where we're heading, and that troubled me a lot. It also troubled me that we had devalued trades education and applied education to the extent that we had. We'd driven industrial arts out of the school system. Anyway, I got this Fulbright in 2007, and I decided I would go to America. They have aircraft hangars there that are full of literature on student success and retention. I was going to trawl my way through this literature and develop a template that I would come back and say to an institution, if you put this template over the top of what you're doing, make the changes, you'll have the most successful institution in the world. Then 2 or 3 things started to trouble me as I was sitting at the University of California, Berkeley, and that was that none of this literature has made the slightest bit of difference to America. And that the more knowledgeable and the more people I talked to, it didn't matter what the literature said. It didn't matter all these brilliant pieces that have been written and given in the academic tick. The system was ploughing on, going to hell in a handbasket. And as the demographics challenged it, it all was getting worse, right? And that really troubled me a lot. And I realised that even though I'd been given this splendid award, on the basis of a proposal, I decided to completely scrub that. I was asking the wrong questions, I was looking in the wrong places, and I was really terrified that I would come back to New Zealand with nothing to offer. And so I started to read a bit more frantically. That's what you do, isn't it, when you're academic? And so I noticed all of a sudden, and this was a real revelation, on an autumn day, a sunny autumn day, sitting in the little office I had in Berkeley, and all of a sudden I realised 2 things which changed my whole view. One of them was, if I was reading about English-speaking education systems, I was reading the same story. Didn't matter. New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, all the same story. we'd all done much the same things, developed in much the same ways, and we were getting much the same results, or more importantly, weren't getting much the same results. So that was one thing. And the second thing was, I realised that the whole of this New Century Scholar Scheme that year was addressing equity and access in higher education. And I realised that it's no good looking only at higher education to address issues of equity and access, because the equity and access was shot to ribbons by what was happening prior to higher education, prior to tertiary. And it was really the failure of the school system that was really producing the greatest level of inequities and damaging access. And so I took a position that said, what we have to do is stop thinking about sectors and start thinking about students and start thinking about the student journey and think much more holistically over the top of a pattern which had become really embedded and inflexible and concreted in over 150 years. And to do that, I flipped is the word we use nowadays, switched the way in which equity and access is used. Instead of seeing them as at the input end, I put them at the output end. And I said, let's try to develop a system where we measure equity only in terms of results. Not about opportunity. It's not about a thing. Opportunity is merely a component of moving a student towards equity. In other words, and access wasn't access to education, it is what does education give you access to. So the quality of those outcomes was really critical. And so I started a little journey, and I'm going to mention some of the things about that on the way through today, because I've arrived at a point now, and you're going to pay the price for that, I don't apologise for that, where I do believe passionately that competence in teachers at all levels in the system isn't the issue. I do believe that technology is having almost no impact on what we do currently. It's not about the way we work, it's about the frameworks we work in. And I think that the issue is structural, therefore the solutions are going to be structural. And that, you see, it can only be structural things that produce those similarities across oceans between 5 countries. And when you look at the education systems that we believe are performing better and which we admire and envy, they are all structurally different to the way we work. And so that's the kind of thing. If that's not to your liking, then it's no good leaving. I've removed all the food from the morning tea room. But first I'll show you some holiday pictures. I've been in Europe for a few weeks. That's the Salzburg, and that's cows on parade, and that's the Sound of Music cow. I thought you'd enjoy that. We were trying to avoid everything to do with the Sound of Music, but it wasn't possible. But I knew my life was complete just after that, when I saw that there was the possibility of going that evening to a performance of the Sound of Music performed by marionette puppets. Does it get better? And lovely little things, that's a bit distorted on that screen, but those lovely old, several hundreds of years old wrought iron signs above every shop along the street. And then I came across that one. And I thought, well, I suppose they got the tick for historic stuff. And then I went for a visit, and hence the title of this. I think Judy sent me an email saying, what's the title of this presentation? And that very day, I was going to visit Memento Park. Memento Park is in Budapest, and it's a little bit outside the city, and in it are all of the huge statues that used to be around Budapest when the communists were in charge. And so you had all these splendid statues of Lenin, who used to be on street corners and in squares, are now in a park that's really hard to get to. And you don't know it's there. It's hidden away in amongst the scrubby sort of land. It's about 5 acres of statues. And so you've got all these are huge, these things, you know, they're 3 stories high. They are huge, and you've got these statues that are there now. Now, I asked questions about that. Once they had a power, didn't they? I mean, I've been in Russia back in the 70s and 80s, and these statues were powerful. They served a purpose. But they seem to me to be stuck out here and have no power anymore. And so that's what I was suggesting in the title, Memento Park or 21st Century. You know, to what extent have some of the things we're hanging on to in education become the statues in the park? And worse, how have they been changed? Because that was for the most poignant thing. That's Stalin's boots. If I stood next to it, I'd go up to about the crease in it. But in the uprising in Budapest, they damaged the rest of the statue. They just broke it up, but the boots survived. And I wonder whether some of the features of our education system are really Stalin's boots. It's all that's left, you know, of things we're trying. Anyway, that seemed like a good idea for a title. I was having fun in Budapest, and I felt obliged to explain it to you. Salman Khan, I'm not going to make a case for Salman Khan because I know there's varying points of view, has got this little statement. And what he's talking about is that there are cracks, he calls them cracks, in the education system through which too many young people are falling, right? And he says that the trouble is that education changes so slowly. I was just having a conversation before I started about Thomas Jefferson, and it was suggested to me that if Thomas Jefferson walked into a community today, the thing he would most easily recognise as a school, because it would be much the same as it was in his day. And it is true that you know, we keep talking about the massive change we face, but it's had actually very little impact. So you get that sort of point of view. Salman Khan went on, of course, to offer, starting in response to his niece who was learning algebra, went on to make a little video, and someone said, why don't you put that on YouTube? Others would like that, and now it's quite a huge thing. If you look at them, actually a lot of the videos are pretty awful. I mean, there's nothing technically smart about them. They're just bunged up there like home movies, really. But they teach people, and people find the so, you know, it's an interesting thing, but that's his point of view. I could take fill up the rest of the day with opinions like that from people outside of education. It is a commonly held view. And in New Zealand, it's scary the extent to which people are now recognising what needs to be done. And we are probably, as an education system, being slowed to respond, slow to move. Bill Gates, he's another one who throws $1 billion at it. He said, we used to worry about young kids dropping out of school because, and we have to do something about it because it's hurting them. He said, now we worry about kids dropping out of school. We have to do something about it because it's hurting us. And that's the scary truth. If we don't do something about the performance of the education system at all levels, then economists are forming the view that our economies cannot withstand the pressures that they'll go under. That we will not have enough skilled people to keep the kind of activity going. We'll all be competing with each other for skilled migrants. The countries which supply skilled migrants themselves will no longer be as underdeveloped as they are, and they will want to retain their skilled migrants. The equation just doesn't add up. The people that we need to have success, and if I look around the room, frankly, the ones that need to look after you in your old age, are in school now. We've got to bring about those changes really, really quickly. Why does that number keep flashing up there? There's a prize for anyone who knows what that number is. No, didn't get it? Oh well. In the time that I'm talking to you this morning, that's the number of American high school students that drop out. Every hour that the school system's open, 1,473 students drop out. It comes to 1.45 million a year. It's a lot, isn't it? Why do I tell you that? Because our figures aren't as big as that. They're proportionately much the same. But the scale of the issue that we have in New Zealand is manageable. We could write a list of the names of people that we could turn things around with. And in fact, the Ministry of Education currently has got a bee in a bonnet about it, that she wants names. She wants schools to name the people that if we changed their success levels in school, we would turn the system around. Actually, in the first instance, we'd meet the 85% NTLT level 2 target, which is the driver for them. So a friend of mine in London says to me often, you haven't got problems in New Zealand because any weekend you could all get together and sort it out. And the embarrassing thing is that there's an element of truth in that. We could sort it out if we had a will to. We could sort it out if we prepared to think differently. We could sort it out if we didn't want to protect our turf and territory so much. If we worked differently. Money is not the issue. There is plenty of money in the education system. Where we use it, how we use it, is an issue. And I'm not going to be the old scratched record because many of you will have heard me on most of the issues. I'm not going to mention to you that disengagement's a big issue because you know it is. I'm not going to mention the needs as a feature of our community because you know it is now. It's even being quantified and is constantly being referred to. I'm not going to talk about low achievement for too many students because you face the reality of that at your door every day of the year because you have students who have been ill prepared to come on into your courses and you need to respond to that. The failure of students to gain basic skills. Is there any other endeavour in society, funded by society, that after 13 years says, sorry, we haven't managed to do anything? And we see kids leaving schools with nothing to show for many, many years of education. That then becomes our problem, isn't it? That's why we have to develop this interest across boundaries. We are the ones that have got the vested interest in doing something about this. The universities are very comfy. They're not going to worry. They've got the supply line going and they get the students they want. PTEs, by and large, have grown up in this sort of chaotic environment of failure. So they are tooled for that. That's where they've positioned themselves. We are the only area, really, that can meaningfully do something about it. And so we have to become instruments of change, agents of change, and influencers, so that we have to be working with our school system in order to say we're going to have to work differently. Anyway, and then there's that peculiar one at the bottom, isn't it? Difficult students who seem to resist our best efforts. That's a real mystery to me. I've never, when I was an English teacher, never understood why they couldn't respond. Until finally I ended up teaching in a school where I knew I couldn't teach. I went to a school back in the days when they were very rare that had a majority of Maori and Pacific second language students. And I didn't know how to teach them. That was quite a wake-up call because I was successful. I had a good career going, Bang, hit the wall. Difficult students, yeah. So the basic premise is, as I said, the issues are structural, the solutions are structural, right? We're going to look at them. Why do I like to talk about structure? Well, once you've got the plan, once you've put the structure down, then if the function's decided, the way it's going to work's decided, its purpose is decided. Here's a couple of plans, 2 for a house. It's difficult to park the car inside the bottom one, isn't it? You can already tell about the lifestyle likely to take place. It's being set in concrete. The war machine's on the right. The top one's not going to be very effective on land, and the bottom one underwater. Once you've got the plan, it's done. And if you can't retrofit the capacity to go on land for a submarine, right? So those are what I mean by structures. All of those things are, in fact, the ways in which we have predetermined our activity is going to be. I'm not going to talk much about the curriculum because in a tertiary environment, we probably have as much control over that as we need. We can actually do things to the curriculum. We're not forced to. We should have an opinion about the curriculum that prepares students to come to us. That should be an important one. one, and we should be able to communicate to those who prepare students to come to us about what that curriculum should be achieving, and about the kind of skills people need to be academically ready to come into a next stage of their learning. No, I think really, I've actually just said that, haven't I? Yeah. What I'm saying is that, unless we change the structures we work in, it's going to carry on. That's what in a nutshell. And the curriculum, time. Have a think about who said your courses have to be as long as they are. There's been some work done at Otago Polytechnic where they believe quite passionately, and I think I accept their arguments, that a 3-year degree could just as easily and effectively be taught in 2 years. That time served, you see. I mean, we actually have these chunks of time generally for structural reasons, to meet the needs of budgets and those sorts of things. Who said that we need to work the number of weeks we do in a year when students' lives are important? It's costing them money to be idle. When we wish to have breaks, are there other ways we can work? Who said that we can't work to trimesters instead of semesters? Well, I'll tell you what will knock that on the head. I know an institution that wants to start that, but what will knock it on the head is the inability of the TC to understand how to fund it. It's just crazy stuff, really. All those structural things keep getting in the way. Timetables, the way we use the day. I don't think, the tribal benchmarking exercise that goes on. Do you know about that? Oh, ask about it. It's going on across the polytechnic sector. Average occupancy of academic teaching spaces in our institutions is about 2 hours a day. We're hugely oversupplied. How many of you can't find a room when you need one? And the facts tell us we are hugely oversupplied with rooms. And so, that needs thinking about. The teaching day, if I need to go into town to a meeting, I never leave between 3:15 and 3:15 because all the students are leaving. A tertiary institution, they're all leaving at 3:15 in that time frame. Who said that we could only start then when it might suit a lot of students to start at 7 in the morning and work, different ways? And we somehow think that the time of the day is fixed. Who says we can't work at weekends? Well, we know the answer to a lot of those questions about what the issues are. I haven't got up there that the frameworks of union organisation and things like that are also structures that need to be looked at. The availability of assistance. How easy is it for someone to get help? I was telling someone I enrolled in the MOOC the other day, one of those massive online open courses, Introduction to Philosophy at the University of Edinburgh. For a long time, I've never been loved so much by someone. I get loving messages from the University of Edinburgh, and I'm looking forward to having me on the course when it starts the next week. And they've sent me the details to get the book, which they're not going to cost much. Things like that, And I know that if I fire questions back to them during the course of that, I'm going to get answers straight away. And they're in Edinburgh, and I'm not. And face to face, it's more difficult. It may be easier for me to get help from Edinburgh than it is for a lot of students in our institution to get help within a week. I think that there are exceptions, of course. The availability of the linear progression. What wrecks the school system is the notion that Christmas is important. And Christmas, every year, the school kicks kids out of one level and bums them in the next. And doesn't matter about their readiness, doesn't matter about the coherence of the progress that they're making. No, we just do it. And that's crazy. And that's how you get people actually getting on a trajectory that's towards failure. And it's probably starting very, very early. I mean, why do you think there's so much resistance to national standards? Well, just the very notion that there should be standards and benchmarks and progress points is a bit anathema to the way we work. And so much of what we do is never mind the quality, feel the warmth. And we say to people, they've been in primary school for 8 years and they can't really read. There should be no one who can't read. Every human being is born with the capacity to read. The only thing difficult about reading and language and that is that it seems to be left to the schools to do something about it. You know, we could tackle that and do that. So the year-based cohorts is a nonsense. Finland doesn't have it at a certain level. The last 3 years of secondary school there, students just do courses. And the courses aren't based on year groups, they're based on sets of short courses. They typically do 72 courses in their 3 years. They lump them together in ways that produce, you know, I mean, a bit like vocational pathways was set out to do. And they get those courses. Typically, they get 90 courses they complete. And if they can't get a couple of courses to add to what they're doing at their own school, that's okay. You can go to the neighbouring school and do some courses. You know, it's just a different way of thinking, of using time and of using students' time. End on qualifications, you know, it's not what reforms do to schools and education institutions, it's what the institutions do to reforms. And what we do is we look at a reform and we embrace it in a kind sort of way, but we embrace it so we can drive a knife in through the back, by and large. We embrace it so that we can socialise it into the way in which we've already worked. There is nothing about NCA that suggests that it should be taught in year levels. Absolutely nothing about it. And yet that's the way. Why? Because we needed to have something that looked like the old exams. We needed to know that each year there was some difference about the year. Okay, so, you know, it's some of these things are just uncritically accepted. Face-to-face teaching, self-directed learning. Have we got those balances right? Do we really understand the difference between the two? Are we exploiting the ways in which we could be? Well, I'm going to do this little course, and I'm sure it'll be successful because they're going to give me a certificate. They've already told me that. Doesn't take much to keep me going. And there'll be no face-to-face delivery. You know, and I think that sometimes we've got those things we need looking at. And finally, when we brought in the qualifications framework in New Zealand, which affects all of us right across the entire system, we were promised that time served would be dead. And it hasn't happened at any point in the system. We still talk about requirements in terms of time. I do know a little instance where it has been challenged, and I'll mention that as we go on. I'll mention a school because why can't a tertiary institution work differently on different days? There is a school in Auckland, I won't spend too much time because you can go and look it up if you like. They have no classes on Wednesday. None at all. But at the end of each semester, students will have completed an impact project. And that will be negotiated. It involves spectacular levels of community engagement and business engagement and academic engagement. They have to craft their understanding of their own program so that they can, you know, one girl I met recently was doing credits for physics in a project that was about early childhood education. You know, that's quite interesting. And you know, that I saw stuff coming out of that school and year 12 and year 13 students that any tertiary institution would be pleased to see coming out of the Keystone projects in the last year of a degree. Absolutely. Stuff that was being commercialised. Stuff that Microsoft was putting into its apps store for Androids. You know, a wonderful app that this kid had developed at teaching the basics of music to people. Yeah? Year 12. Yeah? So it's real learning, you know, and I mean, read my blog this last Monday. That's all about this project. But it's something that we could be doing, perhaps, in a tertiary institution. But somehow we feel it's so important to have that student corralled with someone like me. Yeah. And yet, is that the best way to work? Pastoral care. I think there's a lot of questions to ask about support. And I think polytechnics are leading the way a bit in the support they give. But there shouldn't be an assumption made that the support can be delivered by everyone. Everyone should do the things they can do. And some people are not good at delivering support. They're good at the general teaching and that, and but we should be working more in teams so that we can bring to bear on the teaching learning equation bring to bear a wider range of personal skills. And it is personal skills. I mean, there's some people, you wouldn't want to have living support. They just aren't that sort of person. There are other people that you say, they might be the greatest teachers in the world, but they're the sort of people who can unpick a problem for a student and can work their way through it. And I think that we've got to be able to do that with parity of esteem within an institution, instead of having a silly academic staff, general staff kind of split. The meaningless kinds of things. If there's anyone on the payroll that's not contributing to the success of the student, they should go. What's the point in having anyone on the payroll? That fellow that came in and fixed the blind for us while you were busy in your workshop, he's materially contributing to the quality of what we do. Why? Because there'd be a better environment in here for certain kinds of uses and that sort of thing. So everyone should feel that they have the major contribution to make to what's happening. Grouping of students. Now, this is where I feel my pulse starting to race. The difference between one year and the next is usually a Christmas holiday, because that's not how people learn. It's not how development takes place. And I think too, we make that same mistake. Well, why do we need to have year 1, year 2, year 3 of a degree? What's the sense in that? We're really talking about a space of time in which a student needs to reach a certain point. And we need to be careful about that. But, I think the importance of the academic year is largely around ships sailing to England to have exam papers marked each year, as it used to do. That surely we've moved past that. We've got to be challenging time. We know that learning occurs cumulatively. We know that sort of Bergsonian view of the eternal presence, la duce, where students are bringing their learning along with them, and they're adding to it, and things are happening. It doesn't happen on, well, I did year 1, forget that, I'll do year 2 now. It's like tricks for ponies, and that's why perhaps they end up not being as self-reliant and as our graduate profiles suggest they should be. So we need to think about that. We also actually are holding too many people back who could be moving much more quickly through the system. Why are we holding them back? We're holding them back for economic reasons, by and large. But, we've got 14-year-olds coming into MIT now, haven't we? And, hasn't brought the show down, hasn't caused a problem. We're good at what we do, and those students are most appropriately offered something that will enable them to learn and develop, and in our setting, and so that's where they should be. It's crazy stuff thinking that age-related place determines where you belong, where you should be. School leaving ages, don't suggest that we tamper with those unless you're going to agree with my proposition to you today. It could be a resolution of the conference before we finish, that it be reduced the age of 14. Now, I think that would be an excellent move, because it has no meaning whatsoever other than as a signal about something changing. And 14 seems to be a good age to say the elementary part of an education should be completed by then, and then we are now adding to it with more focused knowledge. The school leaving age has never produced. There are fewer 16-year-olds in our schools now than there was when the school leaving age was 15. There's no impact on what people do. Sectors have outlived their usefulness. They happened accidentally, they were never planned, there's never been a grand design that has produced them. There was a feeling that elementary education was important enough for it to be universal. While at the end there's always been, for 8, 9, 10, 100 years, there's been higher education. And slowly we started to fill the gaps. And then we had secondary schools developed pretty accidentally, to be honest. And there's never been a grand discussion about that. And then once we got them, there are a whole lot of other things happened, and we started to say, well, students should stay at school longer, because you see, they were secondary until they were 19, and then they could go to a tertiary education of some kind. Do Do you know that keeping students at school for 5 years, and that happened between 1975 and 1992, went from 10% to 65%. That's exactly when disengagement and dropping out rocketed. In other words, it's a direct consequence of us keeping students long past the point where there is a useful purpose being served. And we should be moving them on more quickly and into different ways. Not those who have gone to university. That's the comfortable rut that they're in, and they're going to go right through. And it works really well. The universities are not short of well-prepared students ready to go. They grizzle every now and again. But by and large, there's plenty, the supply on that side is fine. But we know, because we have to work with students who are not coming to us well-prepared and ready to go. Many are, but many aren't. So, just seamlessness. Do you remember Lockwood? Lockwood Smith? Oh, a great sigh swept across the audience. You know, he got pilloried for suggesting that our education system should be seamless. And yet, I think it's probably the only thing that really matters. Because kids are seamless. Growing up is seamless. Cognitive development is seamless. Learning is seamless. And so we should aspire to say we work to promote seamlessness, not to destroy it. But the rest is pretty obvious there, isn't it? And the difficult transitions can be avoided. Every one of those lines represents a major issue for students dropping out of education. Right? And so, you know, these circles are so different that you require different qualifications to work in them. You require different unions to represent them, different curriculum to control them. You have to do it on different sites in case they contaminate each other. And you need a different organisation, right? Now, Finland, who we envy and admire, has none of those distinctions. Every teacher, right through, has the same level of qualifications, at least a master's degree. Many have more. They have one teacher organisation from early childhood to university. The curriculum is managed much more locally by schools, right? Ours should be too, but it tends to have a pretty heavy national footprint on it. The sites, they work flexibly over sites, and so they had to, when they revised their education system in the 1970s, they still had to use all the buildings they had, so they just used them differently. And so you often have one principal that's looking after multiple sites, and kids have a lot of flexibility about where they go. So, you know, organisationally, they did structural things. And what they've done is produce a pretty evenly high performance system. It performs not all that much ahead of us in terms of achievement at the top, but it certainly performs miles ahead of us in terms of equity. In other words, the gap between the high performers and the low performance is very narrow. Our gap is second only to Turkey. Okay, nothing to be proud of there. That's not to disparage Turkey. The actual transition things is more complex than that diagram, because if you have the 4 or 5 major transitions down the left-hand side of that diagram, which you find some difficulty in reading, that's fine, just squint your eyes and enjoy the colour. We also have a lot of transitions within sectors, and every one of those we know statistically produces a drop-off rate. You say, surely not. Yes, 4,500 students leave our primary schools never to appear again. It's Wizard of Oz stuff, isn't it? Right? You know, 20% of 16-year-olds are no longer in the system. 50% of those who start a qualification post-secondary never finish it. You know? Are you worried? Oh, that's just my little view. We could have 2 sectors and the world would be very different. Up to year 10 and beyond year 10. You know, I don't know what we call them, Jack and John, perhaps. Anyway, you must know there's no support whatsoever anywhere for that. Programs, and I'm just going to mention quickly a little development at MIT where we worked structurally. And what we did was we produced a program which is styled as the MIT Tertiary High School, And it has dual enrolment. Students are enrolled both in the high school and in their high school and in our institution, right? That's important for a number of reasons. You can see with that. Students at the age of 14 or 15 come into our institution and have access to our programs, right? Simultaneous integration of sectors. They are both secondary and tertiary students. They aren't secondary students, they aren't tertiary students, they are both. They are working towards the goals of both the secondary education and the tertiary education. They're doing it simultaneously, they're doing it in a totally integrated program. So they can't always put their finger on something and say whether it's secondary or tertiary. They're working across levels, so they work at multiple levels for NCA credits simultaneously. They generate level 1, level 2, level 3 credits in the same year. They are working across levels between their NCA work and their technical qualifications. They end up with multiple qualifications, so they get their NCA. Our promise to them was, we're not going to take you out of school. You're going to do really well in school, but you won't be at school. That had an appeal to the schools, because a lot of the recruitment hinges around the ugly thing. It'll be a race to see whether they leave or we get rid of them. And so these are quite a difficult group of students, but they're students who are right up against the wall. And we have teachers from different sectors working alongside each other as colleagues. We've got 12 secondary teachers, and we have however many, there's about 20 of our staff, I think, across the institute, conventional institute, if you like, are working with them. So you see, really, the tertiary high school is about structure. It's not about some sort of airy-fairy notion of how we teach. It's actually about structure, and it's about the setting within which teaching takes place. What are their results? Well, there's a little chart. We now have been going long enough. This is the 4th year, and with the NCA, we now have a report of level 1, level 2, level 3, moving from the left to the left and the right. And up there are 12 schools. 11 of them are the decile 10 schools in Auckland, and the 12th one up there is the tertiary high school. Right? And usually at this stage we have a sweepstake, offer a prize. Which one is it? Put you out of your misery, it's that one there. So the success rate at level 1 is 85%, at level 2 is 96%, and obviously a smaller group doing level 3, 100%. Does anybody in this blessed and rich country have to fail? Answer, no. Now, these kids will finish in their, what would have been their year 13 or year 14, with not only excellent NCA results, at least meeting the NCA level 2 or an equivalent, so that we make sure that's achieved. Actually, a funny thing happened. This was all about trades, this was all about applied and technical education. What's developed in this program? I'll tell you what's developed, a little academic stream. And there's a group of kids who say, we can do all this stuff, we want you to take us right through to level 3 with university entrance, because we want to have the choice of going into any degree. Not just here at MIT. And so, this is a very exciting, transformational program. There's over 200 students been through this program to this point. It will grow still to about 320, and then it'll have to stop at about that, because if you put too many students into a program like this, you start to distort the mainstream opportunities that you've got. But no one's died. No institutions have had to close, and here we have kids and their families having a better life. And I tell you, this program is just as transformational for families as it is for students. So don't tell me it can't be done. And then there's another little way you can look at structure. Yes, I see your anxiety. You can have a little change or a big change. There's lots, and we're now working with lots of schools in all of those sections of that modest. We've got radical solutions outside the school, ones that are half in and half out of a school in the tertiary institution, some that are right inside the school where we're working with schools. So, you know, there is flexibility there now, because why? Well, the tertiary high school changed the law, and the law now says money can be used across boundaries. There's ways of doing it, and a lot of polytechnics have got their versions of being able to put these things into place. And it's happening without a fuss, and no government has been defeated on the strength of it. So, you know, there's that. There's if you want a whole plan one, that's actually a plan how an entire school could be organised, working with ITPs and with business, industry and commerce. And there is a school being rebuilt as from over the next 3 or 4 years that'll be working with MIT to achieve that. I know you can't read that. Just squint your eyes and, you know, follow the shape, because it's about shape, it's about structure, it's about porous boundaries. You know, I wish I could do better diagrams that had porous boundaries, but you know, it is about, but it's also about not loose, it's within a frame, and that frame is about the requirements of a system, and it is about destination. And that destination is very strongly in this world that we're moving into. It's about jobs and it's about employment. And if anyone thinks that's a dirty word, well, there are dirty jobs as well. And, you know, it's just something that we've got to get back to having a view of purpose, and that we know from the research that's been done that the key thing that changes these kids is purpose. All of a sudden they have a line of sight to the future. And they can say, we know that we can do it. Where the message they've received in 10 years has been, you can't do it. You're not a nice person. We don't like you. You're mucking it up. You're making it difficult for us to do what we want to do. Those are the messages. And all of a sudden, do you know what they say when I say to them, what's different about being there? They say, it's really quiet. It's really quiet. I'm going to leave that up there, and I'm going to finish just there, because I want you to know that I believe all of you could go back and do everything that we've talked about here today. It's within our power to do it. We have the resources to do it, and by golly, we need to do it. Okay? Kia ora koutou katoa.